Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we're talking about custom image galleries. So today we're going to build two different image galleries. One is going to be a more simplistic gallery, and the other one is going to be a grid or masonry gallery. The first one here is a simple gallery where we have thumbnail images that we can click on, and it loads the image directly in the main content display. Okay, the next one is a little bit more complex. It's the grid gallery or masonry gallery, where we have all of these images that are stacked neatly together in this grid, and when we hover over them, they will become colorized, and then we can also click for a light box. Okay, so let's hop over to the builder and let's get started. So to build this, all we're using here is the attachments field that's built into Tadabase. So I've added a field to a table, and I chose the attachments field because I can upload multiple files to that single field. And before we get to the custom component stuff, I just wanted to take a moment and just talk about kind of how regular components work. Okay, so on this page, I've added a list component, and we have a detail page to display more details about that particular record. And when we preview this page, you can see it's going to load just as you would expect. Okay, we have a single record because I only have one record in the data table, but it's displaying in this particular format known as the list component. Now, all that's really happening behind the scenes is that we have a data table that's storing information, right? And that information is our record. On that record, we have the field. So we have the name of the record and we have all of the images that are uploaded in the attachments field. Now, when you preview the application or you're actually visiting the live published application, when the page loads, we're simply just loading the records from the chosen table, okay? And we're doing like a sort of data binding. So we're saying, here's the component that's going to load, here's how it's going to look, and here's the data that's going to feed into it. So all of the styling and the actual structure of the component here, in this case, the list component, that all loads through HTML and CSS, okay? And then we are binding the data from our data table and the records that need to be loaded into that particular template, okay? So that HTML and that CSS combination. So with the custom component, what we can do is we can actually create our own HTML and CSS template, and the data binding works the same way. So we're selecting a data table that we want to load the records from. That data is fed into our custom template, and then it's rendered on the page in any number of ways, depending on how you've actually built the custom component. All right, so when we go to something like the simple gallery and we look at that, this is how it would look by default without any sort of actual styling. So I've created some HTML here, and we'll take a look at that now just so it makes a little bit more sense. But I've created a simple template, HTML template, but there is no styling. Once I add that styling in there, then that's really where everything kind of comes together. So anyways, let's go through the actual galleries themselves and kind of creating a custom component for the first time. And we'll take it step by step. Okay. Now I don't expect anybody to be, code experts or anything like that. I'm not a code expert, but the great thing about the custom component is because Tadabase works on basic web development frameworks, you can find any number of components, I guess, on the internet. So for this example here, I actually just searched for simple HTML image galleries, and I found two links that looked cool. And I basically copied and pasted the HTML and the CSS from those instructions into the custom component, and we're done. Okay, maybe some slight modifications here and there. But anyway, so let's look at a sample page and we'll look at adding a custom component for the first time. So here we're displaying the details of, okay, let's actually go back to this page. We're displaying the detail component, like the regular Tadabase detail component. But we want to take these images that are all inside the attachments field and we want to create a gallery for them. Okay, so we are going to actually remove this detail component and we're going to add a custom detail component. So when you choose the custom component and add it to a page, you have three options. The first option being list. So not to be confused with the list component that we talked about just a minute ago. This simply means list the records. Okay, so the second one is detail. So this works almost identical to the detail component where you're loading information about one single record. So when you're on a detail page, you can view a customized detail component for that one particular record. And then the last one is the summary, which works very closely to a card component where you can create custom calculations and then display them in a more customized fashion. So because we're on a detail page and we're loading the attachments field from one particular record, we're going to use the detail custom component. Okay, we're going to select our data table. So this is the data binding that we're talking about, where we want to say load the records from this particular table. And then in order to tell the custom component what records to look at, we are using these helper tags. So the custom component is built off of helper tags. And what we're looking at now is a brand new custom component. And every single one is going to start with each records. Okay, so double curly bracket, pound sign, and then each records. So the actual like helper that's here, the helper template is each, meaning for each do the following, and then your code goes in here. Now for each what, we have to define that, and that's why it loads with records. So for each record in the selected data table, do the following. So for the first gallery that I showed off at the beginning, the simple gallery, the one with the thumbnails, this is the actual code that I found on the internet. Okay, so this is um, essentially what we're doing here. Let me split this up so we can take a look at each section. First, we have this div element here called with a class of gallery wrapper. Okay, this expands all the way down to line number 19, and everything here is contained within this particular div element. Now, this is simply like a wrapper, or like a container for everything within. Now, the way that they built this in the example is they actually created 3 images and then 3 thumbnails. But because we are loading our records and our record information dynamically, we don't need to create 3. What we need to tell the custom component to do is to loop through the records and output each image as like a particular or a single item. So if we take a look at the updated code, which is the stuff that I'm actually using, we can see here that we're still looping through all of the records with the each tags. Okay, and the gallery wrapper still exists. And the gallery display, you can see I changed some of the classes a little bit, but then we're saying for each record that comes through, we're going to create this element for each item within the actual attachments field. And we can do that by using the each tag again. And then because the attachments field is an array, we can say for each item within the array of that particular field, create this element. And that is the image element. Okay, now we can do the same thing for the thumbnails, where we're saying for each item within the attachments field, create the thumbnail. Okay, so we don't have to actually like figure out how many images are in our attachments field and then create elements for each individual image. Like say if we had 7 images, we don't have to create 7 actual images. We can just tell the custom component to say for each one, create an element. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Trying to keep it as simple as possible. But anyway, so here's what we're looking at for the actual HTML. Now, there is no styling on this. There's no CSS. So this is simply the raw HTML, and any kind of like external styling that's happening when you load a page might take effect for some of these elements, but we haven't set any particular or specific CSS to override any of that vendor styling. So let's save this, and then we're going to preview this page just so we can see what it actually looks like without the actual styling. Okay, so here's all the images that are loading just with no styling whatsoever. Okay, so it's taking each particular or each upload in the attachments field, each image in the attachments field, and essentially creating an individual item for it. Now, when we actually start to style this page, we're going to target each individual item so that we can make it look nice. All right, so I'm going to just copy and paste here the CSS that we use, and we'll kind of walk through each bit here. So on screen here, you can see I have, this is an extension that I use to kind of do CSS on the fly, like on the actual page. You can see when I paste in the CSS that we're using, everything's going to snap into place and it's going to look like our finished result. Okay, so we're targeting each class. So first we have that gallery wrapper. Again, this is the main container that holds everything for the image gallery. And then we are just doing some more CSS as we go down the line. So the next one here is for the actual display. All right, so I'll try to explain briefly kind of what each line does, or at least the point of each each part. But again, I'm not an expert. And anyway, so the first thing we're doing with the gallery wrapper is we're setting a max width. So we want everything in the actual in this element or this container, we want it to have a max width, and I chose 1,000 pixels. The next one is margin auto, which centers it. Okay, and then I'm choosing a specific way to display all of the um, containers contents, and that's something called Flexbox. So Flexbox is super powerful and it lets you configure things in a really simplistic way. So I'm just saying, let's use display flex, and here's how we want to align all of our content within the container. Okay, now for the gallery display, which is where the image is actually displayed, we're setting a max width of 600 pixels. So this particular container has a smaller width than the main container, and we only want it to be that big at its largest. And then we're also using display flex here, and we're only displaying one image with this particular line here, overflow X is hidden. So if I delete this, you're going to see all of these other images load. When I put it back, you're going to see they'll all be hidden. Now, the reason this works is because of the next section here, where we're actually styling the images themselves. So the images share the same max width as the actual container. So the image is going to be 600 pixels wide, the container is 600 pixels wide, and because we're hiding the overflow, it's only going to show one image. The thumbnails are also using this Flexbox, and we've set a max or a width and a height for the thumbnails as well, and some other items here for how they should display, like the margins and border radiuses and stuff. Now, you can see here that we're clicking on the image and it's loading into the container that should display the image. So what's actually happening there is we're linking the two. So if we go back to our custom component, we can kind of see more how powerful the custom component can be. And we have the thumbnail section here. We have the actual image display section here. Now, the image that's loading to be displayed has a name. And the name that I've chosen is a value from the image that's uploaded to the attachments field. Okay, and I've chosen the file ID. So for each item within the attachments field, we are going to load the file ID as the name and the URL as the image source. Now for the thumbnail, it's an actual link that's linking to the file ID name, essentially. So when you click on the thumbnail, it finds the image here by its name and displays it. Okay, and then again for the image source, we're using the URL for each image inside of the attachments field. Okay, so let's put this, where are we? Okay, there we are. Let's put this CSS back into the actual template so everything will load when the page refreshes. And here is our finished image gallery. Okay, so you can see I'm clicking on this one. It has a link to a specific file ID name, and it's loading that image here. So the grid gallery or the masonry gallery that we did, that one's a little bit more complex, but it works in the exact same way. Okay, so on a detail page for this record, we want to loop through all of the items within the actual attachments field and then output image elements. Okay, so you can see that here. First, we've said for each record in the selected data table, which is the image gallery, create this element, and then for each item within the attachments field, create this element and use the image source from the item's URL. Okay, and then at the bottom here, because we're loading this as a modal, we just have a simple HTML modal that I actually took off of the Tadabase community. Okay, now Again, there's no CSS here for this particular component right now, where I'm going to show you how this looks, and we'll talk about it on the actual live app. So when I render this page, just like I did in the other one, you're going to see everything is completely unstyled. And as soon as I actually paste in that CSS, everything changes. Okay, so this one, actually there's more CSS and stuff here, but maybe it's not as complex. I don't know. Maybe it just seems like it a little bit. But anyway, so what we're doing is, again, the same thing. We're like setting widths and heights of all of the elements that are being displayed. And for this particular one, in order to get the grid, we're setting everything to specific column counts. Okay, and then everything here are all media queries to say, based on the screen size that's viewing the page, change how many columns are actually being displayed. Like I said, the light box I took right off of the Tadabase community, so I found a post there that explained how to use the light box, and when we click on an image, that loads. Now that uses a little bit of JavaScript, but again, it's not a whole lot. Okay, but I'm going to make sure that all of these actual files, so the HTML, the CSS, and any JavaScript is going to be included in a zip file for this particular video, so that you can explore this yourself. Again, the point here is not necessarily to like teach you to become experts on HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, but really just how to get started with the custom component. Okay, there's only a few basic concepts that we need to understand, and that is the each records, right, in order to loop through the actual selected data source, and loading the actual fields, okay, by their field ID. Additionally, when you're getting started with the custom component, I would highly recommend going to our Help Center and checking out the actual documentation on the custom component. Okay, there's a lot of information here with examples on how you can kind of use the different fundamental pieces of the custom component to output the information that you want. Okay, like working with links. Okay, this works basically the same way as a regular component, where if you want to add an edit link, an action link, a detail link, or a delete link, you can do that. And this is kind of explaining how those links work and how you can load them into the template. Okay. Additionally, there's all sorts of more customized information about how to work with different pieces of data, whether it's strings, collections, numbers, dates, anything like that. Okay, so this documentation is really, really supportive when you're working with the custom component. But again, for the most part, you can find templates on the internet for HTML and CSS and how you would like to display your data. And then as long as you kind of understand how that data binding works with the each records and loading the fields into the necessary places, you can really build anything you want with limited knowledge of the actual code. All right. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I realized that it wasn't necessarily a fully in-depth tutorial, but I just wanted to show you what's possible, and using the templates that I'm going to supply for this video, I hope you'll be able to understand more and start to utilize the custom component to its full potential. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.